Righty ho folks, so we're going to do a presentation on candy for your English Literature Paper 1 exam. Remember, if the question is on candy, you need to check what type of question it is. Is it an extract question? And if it is an extract question, then we're looking for the methods, we're looking for the language techniques within that extract. And that's going to take up 50% of our essay, and then we're going to go to elsewhere within the novel that will allow us to talk about candy. And your significant chapters for candy are chapter 2, chapter 4, chapter 3, major one in relation to Candy's dog, and chapter 5. The key thing here, folks, as we go through this is we want to know about candy, yes, but the question isn't tell us everything you know about candy. The question is going to be, how does Steinbeck present? So what we need to focus on are methods that link to the presentation of candy, and that's got to be our focus all the way through. Okay, here we go. Right, now when we meet Candy, we meet him in section 2. Remember, he meets George and Lenny as they arrive late to the bunkhouse. And the first thing that we want to say about Candy is he's a remnant of a man. And what we mean is that he's left over. He's a man who is old, who is hampered by his age, hampered by his disability, and therefore he is a man who has perhaps been belittled by life. He's physically been belittled, the fact that he has a disability, but also he has a stoop, and we get the idea that he's been worn down by the harsh, rough life of a ranch house worker. So if we want to think about what ranch house life is like, then we think about the effects of that ranch house life on someone like Candy. He's isolated. We only really see him within the bunkhouse, or we see him within Crooks's harness room, but he's not out there playing horseshoes with the rest of the fellas. So he is a man who has little to give, who has been worn down by life, and that has had a physical effect upon him, and it's also had a psychological or a mental effect upon him. So when we think about George and Lenny and the closeness of their relationship and why they want to be together, because they don't want to be like Candy. They don't want to be old, decrepit and alone. So the door opened and a tall, stoop-shouldered old man came in. Now, look at that. We've got this here, description here. What is that, stoop-shouldered? Well, it's a compound adjective. Compound adjective. Remember, Heaney likes those for the poetry. Compound adjective. That's one of your AO2, one of your language methods. So we want to think about Candy. Candy's first introduced with this compound adjective of a stoop-shouldered old man. And when we want to think about that, well, what's it doing? It's implying something. The fact that he's stoop-shouldered shows that he has been weighed down by life, by the harsh conditions on the ranch. And he says, I ain't got no poop no more. And what would we say about that in terms of AO2? Well, we'd say that's colloquial language. So he uses colloquial language to describe how he is a man who is perhaps a remnant of a man, i.e. he is old, he has no longer the energy or the vitality or the vigour that's needed to cope with the physical harsh conditions of living on the ranch. So let's remember two things. Let's remember that compound adjective, stoop-shouldered, and how that can also imply that he has been stooped, or he has been, in some ways, felt the burden of life on the ranch. And let's also think about the colloquial language. Let's think about that word poop. I ain't got no poop no more. So he realises the situation that he's in. Okay, let's think about a third thing about Candy. He appears carrying a broom. Now that's important for Candy, that Candy has this prop, this broom. He's the only one that really has that sort of prop. Now we have Curly and the boss in their high-heeled boots, but the idea that Candy has the broom with him, that he carries the broom with him, what's it there for? It's there to identify his purpose, that he can contribute to something. Remember, life in the ranch is so harsh, it's so cutthroat, it's about doing what you can to get by and surviving, survival of the fittest. You have to be fit enough. Now I know that survival of the fittest doesn't mean that the fittest survive in a Darwinian sense, and that's transgressing, so we're not going to talk about that. But what we mean here is that you have to be fit enough to cope with those conditions. And therefore, well, how can he be? He's stoop-shouldered, he has a stump-like wrist, he is an old man, he has no poop anymore. So how can he cope? What can he contribute? Why would the ranch still want him? Well, he has his broom, and that broom clearly identifies his purpose in life. And therefore, what Steinbeck does is presents him with that broom, and that broom is like a psychological crutch. It's what he needs to show that he's got a purpose, that he can contribute. As long as he has that broom, he's needed, he has a purpose, he will be kept. When he doesn't have that broom, he doesn't have a purpose, he won't be needed, he won't be kept. And we know what he fears. He fears that he'll be treated like his dog is treated in chapter 3. Okay, when he meets Georgia and Lenny, he doesn't introduce himself to them. Instead, he criticises them. He admonishes them for not arriving sooner. And that perhaps shows, again, another element of the depersonalized existence people have on the ranch. He doesn't introduce himself. His name's not important to them at this stage. The first thing that he does is he criticises them, i.e. he tries to exert some sort of sense of status over them. And the criticism allows a weak man to assume a position of authority. Now that's important. It gives him status. The fact that he can say, oh, the boss is angry with you, i.e. I know this. The boss isn't angry with me, the boss is angry with you. So let's think about Candy. And so far we've got that compound adjective, stoop-shouldered. We've got the colloquial language, ain't got no poop anymore. We've got the use of the brush as a psychological crutch, some way to show that he can contribute to society. And we've got the idea that when he first meets George and Lenny, he doesn't introduce himself to them. And again, there's lack of personal connections within the ranch. Instead, what he does is he assumes a sense of status over them by telling them that the boss is angry with them. He says, the boss was expecting you last night, the old man said. He was as sore as hell when you wasn't here to go out this morning. So again, the fact that he has that information and he can trade that information, or he can use that information to give himself a bit more power. And remember, even though we're talking about Candy here, that there are lots of things there that we can take out about ranch life. So ranch life is hard. People need to have a purpose. Ranch life is depersonalized. People don't introduce themselves. Ranch house is about assuming status over somebody else or having some sense of power, and that's what Candy does. Ranch life is isolated. Candy is isolated within that bunkhouse. Okay, he tries to intimidate them by aligning himself directly with the boss. So the boss was expecting you last night, and we've talked about this idea that he has some type of authority, some semblance of authority. Now remember, he can't have very much because he looks so decrepit, but he tries to have authority wherever he can, and he does this with the information that he has about the boss. Okay. So then we come to, oh, look, folks, what's that? What's that? That's another compound adjective. That's 2 that we've got. However, there's this unexpected vision of his stick-like wrist. So he had that moment of power when he could criticize the men because of the boss, but he has this stick-like wrist. Again, it suggests this idea of him being a remnant of a man, incomplete, denied a purpose. That idea that he pushes the broom, but he only has one hand that works. And what we have here too is with the idea of that stick-like wrist, there's the suggestion of perhaps danger or violence, and we wonder, how did he get this injury? Was this injury a result of bunkhouse life? And he'll talk about that later. He pointed with his right arm, and out of the sleeve came a round stick-like wrist, but no hand. So again, we're finding out about ranch house life here, that there is the potential for danger in ranch house life, that there's potential that ranch house life will break the man psychologically and physically. And here we have the idea that, of course, he needs to have a sense of purpose because his obvious physical disability robs him of status and robs him of purpose. Okay, now remember, George gets annoyed at the idea that the bunk mightn't be clean, that there could be ticks or lice in the bed. And so what Candy does is he tries to placate George. He tries to soothe George's anger, and he does this by telling the story about the blacksmith who was really clean and obsessed by cleaning. He uses this phrase repeatedly. So if we want to think of another AO2 in relation to Candy, the idea that he uses repeated phrases, and he uses this phrase of tell you what. Now, What are we going to identify that as? We're identifying that as a verbal filler. He uses this before he begins to speak. And there is a sense that perhaps he uses it to allow him to think of what the answer might be, that maybe what he's trying to do is to invent an answer there and then for the situation. And he says, tell you what, he said finally, the last guy that had this bed was a blacksmith. Tell you what, said the old swamper, why, he just quit. So if we want to think about Candy in another A or two, we're going to think about the fact that he uses repeatedly this verbal filler, tell you what. And it could be, it could relate to the idea that he might make up stories, or that he might be passing on stories of the truth, but they all relate to the idea that he is a gossip. Remember, Candy's name perhaps links the idea of his candy and sweet, and this idea that he tries to be kind, he tries to ingratiate himself. But also we need to think about Candy as a gossip. That's what he likes to do. And we can't really berate him for that, because he is isolated from the men. And so what he does is he lives vicariously through the stories of other people. There's a nice word for you, vicariously. Vicariously. And vicariously means when you take your pleasure, or you live through the experiences of other people. So, oh, would you hear this about such and such, or would you hear this about such and such? The idea that gossiping can be attributed to that idea of living vicariously through people. But that's what Candy does. He doesn't have much of a life, he doesn't have much of an existence. So what he does is he gets his pleasure through the idea of telling other people about other people's existence and their life and their woe. Okay, let's move on. Oh, right, I don't know what I did here with my PowerPoint. It's a bit muddled. It looks a bit strange, but anyway, let's fire on. So at his heels there walked a drag-footed sheepdog, grey of muzzle, with pale blind eyes. Okay, now we really need to think about Candy, and how Candy is closely aligned with his dog. Poor Candy's dog. And what we want here is we want to think about Steinbeck. Well, what's Steinbeck presenting here? Well, he's doing this symbolic representation that the dog represents Candy, in that both are decrepit, both are bothersome, both don't have a purpose. And remember here, folks, look, so far we've had Candy described with stick-like wrist, and we've had stoop-shouldered man, so we've had those compound adjectives. And look, isn't this brilliant? We've got a compound adjective here for the dog as well. So when we want to make a point about Candy being symbolically aligned with his dog, both of these creatures, Candy and his dog, are described by Steinbeck using compound adjectives. Compound adjectives that therefore imply something very important about their character. So think about the drag-footed sheepdog. What good is a drag-footed sheepdog? A sheepdog is there to harness the sheep, to run after the sheep and control them. But if this dog is drag-footed, it can't do its job particularly well. What real good is someone who's meant to clean up? Well, how purposeful can somebody be when they're old and stoop-shouldered and have one wrist, and it's their job to look after all of those men in the bunkhouse? So there is a sense that both of them have outlived their purpose, perhaps. But the key thing about Candy and his dog too is the relationship, that they love each other, and there's this long-lasting relationship established between the dog and the owner. Candy has a real emotional connection to that dog, and that's unusual in the ranch. We've said that the ranch is a hostile environment. We've said that the ranch has the potential for danger. We've said that the ranch is a place that is not marked by its lack of personal, or its lack of, the ranch is marked by a lack of personal connection. I was getting confused there, folks. So there's that idea that people don't introduce themselves, that they do enjoy having a sense of power over others if they can criticise them. And therefore, here we have an emotional connection between the dog and his owner, and it's that emotional connection that keeps Candy going. Without the dog, Candy would have nothing to care for him, or no one to care for him, and therefore the relationship between Candy and his dog is an aberration on the ranch, i.e. it's something that is not seen as the norm. Just as the relationship between George and Lenny is an aberration, that two guys go around together, that they care for each other. So what we could do is we could say the relationship between Candy and his dog parallels the relationship between George and Lenny. And there's got another piece of AO2, that idea that Steinbeck parallels these relationships. And both relationships end badly. You should know this. We have read the book. That should not be a shock to anyone. I put this in because I think it's very funny. But it relates to the idea about how dogs can look like their owners or owners look like their dogs. And just remember that Candy's dog is that symbolic representation of him. Okay, old, decrepit, without a purpose. This is Cher. She was big when I was a kid. I don't know who this other person is. Okay, so we're still in chapter 2, and the dog struggled lamely to the side of the room and lay down. Now folks, you don't need to impress the examiner with huge, big, long, polysyllabic technical terms. We can go for adjectives and adverbs. They are still, in relation to our AO2, worthy of a band 4 or a band 5. It depends on what you want to say about them. So let's look at that adverb lamely. Both dog and owner are physically impaired. Life on the ranch is hard, and it is this place of isolation. So we have this idea that both master and dog are in some way physically impaired. The dog is lame and Candy has a stick-like wrist. Therefore, they're both denied a real sense of purpose, and they know that they know that their position is a tenuous one, i.e. they are at a position where they could very easily lose their home or their life. They're at a position of weakness, and I think that's important because the ranch doesn't tolerate weakness. The ranch is a hostile environment. It's an environment which is very physical. It's an environment which is very masculine. It's an environment that does not tolerate weakness, whether that weakness is physical or mental. Okay, so here you have Candy in the double negatives, part of his dialect here, folks. And remember that use of dialect is one of Steinbeck's features to create the realism of the novel. We talked about the idea that Candy used the colloquial language, I ain't got no poop no more. Well, we can put the word poop down as part of his dialect. So he says, a man on a ranch don't never listen, and he don't ask no questions. So what we have here, folks, we have the idea of double negatives. We've got 3 negatives there in that sentence. So anyway, the rulers of the ranch enforce a lack of connection. There's a lack of empathy. People don't listen, and they don't listen to the problems of other people or the issues of other people, and they don't ask any questions. So there's no sense that people are communicating with each other on any level other than a very functional one. So let's think about the isolation of Candy. If a guy in a ranch don't ever listen, if he don't ask no questions, if they don't introduce themselves by their names, if all they do is be critical and serve a particular function, then this is a place of isolation. This is a place where there is no empathy, there is no human connection. It is a place of isolation, and therefore why would Candy not give all his love and all his humanity and all his concern to that dog? Because there is nowhere else for it to go. Lovely wee phrase here. I've had him ever since he was a pup. And what we have here is the connection and how long that connection has been there for Candy and his dog. And you've got the affection there. And it's that love, it's that loyalty, it's that sense of being bonded to something that is not often seen on the ranch. Now, what you have here is that there's a mutual need, that the dog needs Candy and Candy needs the dog, and that's symbiosis. Now, Steinbeck uses the idea of symbiosis to connect Candy and his dog, just as he does to connect Lenny and George, i.e. George and Lenny need each other. They're in a relationship where both of them will mutually benefit. Candy and his dog need each other. They're in a relationship where they will both mutually benefit. That's what symbiosis is. The point being, there are no other relationships within the ranch. The relationships on the ranch are purely functional. There isn't anything that where a benefit, a personal benefit can result, and therefore that relationship between Candy and his dog is important on the ranch, because until George and Lenny arrive, it exists in no other format. Okay, so let's just think about so far things that we found out about Candy. Okay, so Candy's vulnerable. Remember, he doesn't have a purpose. He has that stick-like wrist. He's always seen presented with the broom. He's ingratiating. He's sweet like candy. He tries to placate George's anger when George is angry about the idea that there might be bugs or ticks in the bunkhouse. He tells them the story about the blacksmith. He uses that phrase tell you what as a verbal filler, repetition of it. He's stoop-shouldered, compound adjective. He's got the stick-like wrist, compound adjective. He's like his dog, who's drag-footed, compound adjective. He's lonely. He's isolated. He lives his life vicariously through talking about the experiences or the conditions under which other people live. He's sly. Now that's going to come out a little bit more once we get to section 3. But also, if we think about the idea that when he got an opportunity to have power over George and Lenny at the very start, he took it. He criticised them. The bosses sore as hell. Cowardly, we're going to see that more so when we get to section 3. But you could, if you wanted to, you could argue that by using the boss and the power of the boss in section 2 over George and Lenny on first meeting, that is a bit cowardly. Judgmental, well, we're going to get that when he talks about Curly's wife. And prejudice, we're going to get that when he talks about Curly's wife. But remember, being judgmental in a sexist way and being prejudiced in a racist way was part of life back then. And our 21st century concepts of what is right don't really fit in with that 1930s American concept of how we should treat women and how we should treat people who are of different ethnic background to us. But those are important things about Candy. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so we talked there about Candy being a bit sly. So here is Steinbeck making that apparent to you. The old swamper warmed to his gossip. Okay, so let's look at that. He warmed to his gossip. Now there's a verb. Now that verb choice is important because what it implies is that he is warming up, i.e. he is becoming more alive, that he is enjoying the experience of gossiping. And if we're going to be critical about him, gossiping is underhanded, it is sneaky, it is about making judgments about other people, being critical about other people behind their back. But also, what other type of communication would Candy be involved in? He's isolated, he's old, he's never out with the other guys, he's just in the bunkhouse or the time that he comes into Crooks's harness room and he goes into the barn. So he's not part of their daily existence out in the field. So gossip is his only way of having a conversation or communicating with other people. On page 49 it says the old man felt reassured he had drawn a derogatory statement from George. So he felt reassured that he could be critical again, or he could be more critical, or he could become more embittered in what he's saying because he had drawn a derogatory statement from George. So he's not confident in his gossip. He needed to feel reassured that his gossip would be well received. If you think about the quotation in the double negatives, that nobody in the ranch, they don't listen, and they don't listen and they don't ask no questions. So that idea of gossiping is something that he approaches tentatively to begin with, but once he knows that he's got an audience who are going to listen to him, then he can become sharper in his criticism. Okay, so here we have this prejudiced, judgmental attitude. I'm going to have a wee drink of coffee here for a second. Now, it is Candy who first brings in the idea that Curly's wife is a tart. And what we want to do there, if we think about the ellipsis There's your OEAO2. So when he does say Curly's married a tart, the ellipsis is important because he knows how strong that noun is. He knows how strong his criticism is, and the ellipsis is showing hesitancy, his hesitancy to say it, or the idea that he's trying to dramatize it. So the ellipsis is important because it either shows his hesitancy, he knows that he's going to take a step here to criticize his boss, or he is dramatizing the effect of it. Both things are sneaky, both things are underhanded, both things are showing Candy not at his best. The idea that he could be critical of such a young girl married just a few weeks. What business is it of his? This is his boss, well, his boss's son, but still his boss in that respect. And yet he would criticize his superior's wife like this. And again, if we think about him as cowardly, look at his reply to George when he's already, he brought up the idea of Curly's wife. He was the one who passed judgment on her, and yet he says, "You won't tell Curly nothing I said." So he is a coward. And here, folks, it's a rhetorical question. Okay, again, that's your AO2. You won't tell Curly nothing I said. Again, double negative used there, part of his dialect. But that idea that he is, he'll give out the criticism, he'll be sharp and he'll be sly behind somebody's back. But if that were to be known, then he reverts to this spineless, timorous man who's happy enough to criticize others as long as they don't know about it. Okay, so that takes us to section 3, big section for Candy. Also big section for Candy's dog, and how the link between Candy and his dog there perhaps makes apparent themes in the novel, such as loneliness, violence and sacrifice. This is important too, folks, because we learn a little bit more about other ranch house men. Carlson, he arrives, and his arrival, he's abrupt and he's disruptive. He spoils the atmosphere. Remember, previous to the arrival of Carlson, George and Slim were playing cards together, and the atmosphere is made to seem calm and confessional, like in that the light is shining. There's a light shining a little bit above the boys, or the men's head rather. But when Carlson comes in, he changes that. His language is blunt and aggressive. He says Jesus and hell, and he uses the horrible N-word, and he turns on the light, the bigger light, and therefore the intimate confessional mood that was established at the start of chapter 3 for George and Slim is destroyed. And he demands the removal of the dog. He uses the imperative verb, get him out of here. There's the violence that's really implied by the arrival of Carlson. And once Carlson arrives and that language brings the theme of violence on board, then really the death sentence is passed on poor Candy's dog. Okay, so in relation to Carlson and his aggression and his violent reaction to the dog, how does Candy react? So first of all, it says Candy squirms uncomfortably, looked helplessly, looked from help from face to face. So what can we take out of that for AO2? Let's take some adverbs. Uncomfortably, helplessly. Again, that idea of him as weak. He looks for help from face to face. So he's not strong enough to stand up to Carlson. How can he be? He's stoop-shouldered. He has a stick-like wrist. He's an old man. How can he? So his reactions to Carlson show that he's scared, he's desperate, he's looking for the authority of others to help him, and he's looking for Slim for that authority, because Slim is the only authority, the only moral authority on that ranch. Yes, the boss is the ultimate authority, and Curly takes authority from the fact that his father is the boss, but the true moral authority lies with Slim, and it's from Slim that Curly wishes to find some way to save his dog. He's pressured by Carlson into a situation that he cannot control, and those the idea that the adverbs uncomfortably and helplessly, they show that. Proudly, when he talks to his dog, shows that emotional connection, that the the dog once was something, as Candy was himself, and there's an idea of self-worth that comes out of that when he can be proud of his dog, when he remembers the useful life that they had. But once the dog is dead, then nobody remembers other than Candy, who'd be alone and decrepit and have no emotional connection. So from this, let's think about Candy and adverbs. So negative adverbs associated with Candy in this situation: he's uncomfortable, and it's uncomfortably and helplessly. But positive adverbs that come from this: proudly. He speaks proudly of what the dog once was and what he once was. The verbs here that show just how belittled or how pressurized Candy is feeling by Carlson: he squirms. He looked for help from face to face, but he didn't get it. Okay. Oh, here's Carlson being so mean. He leaned over and pointed. He pointed with his toe. Now, the idea that he would use his toe just to point at where he would put the bullet in this poor dog, it shows such disrespect. It shows that he has no connection whatsoever to the sanctity of that dog's life, or even how Candy feels about that dog. He just sees it as an object that he needs to get rid of because it's making him feel uncomfortable. He can't cope with the smell. And if you think too about Carlson, what do you mean, Slim? He asks that he asks that question to Slim in relation to the take a shovel, because it would never enter his head that he should bury the dog once he shoots it, because he doesn't see it as having anything that is of value. And again, Carlson is representative of ranch house life. He's big, he's brash, he's brutal, he's all talk. He uses imperatives. He has no personal connection. He doesn't value life. He doesn't understand any connection other than a purely functional or an economic one. And he has no compassion. So he exerts this emotional violence upon poor Candy. He doesn't take on board for 1 second how traumatic these events will pan out for Candy. Per Candy, and he needs to put it off, and he says maybe tomorrow, and he repeats tomorrow. So we've had repetition for Candy a few ways: repetition of compound adjectives to describe him and his dog, repetition of the verbal fillers, and here we have repetition of tell you what, and here we have repetition of maybe tomorrow. He does not want this to happen. He's desperate to try and find a way out of it. Because remember, we've had Steinbeck use the relationship between Candy and his dog to have that the dog is symbolic of him, and therefore to end the life of the dog is in some way saying that, well, this is what lies in store for me. And he wants his weakness is that perhaps it is the right thing to do for the dog. I don't know, but the point being, he doesn't want to think about that. He's not prepared to make that sacrifice. Maybe tomorrow. So the repetition of tomorrow is important there. Okay, so Candy looked a long time at Slim to try and find some reversal, and Slim gave none. Hold on, I have a wee drink of coffee. Again, I've said that Slim is the moral authority on the ranch, and he recognises that. Candy recognises that, and he looks to Slim for mercy. He wants that idea that Slim is the only one who can stop this from happening now. But the very short sentence, and Slim gave none, that short, shocking sentence shows that Slim has made this decision. Slim knows that the sacrifice is needed. Slim doesn't allow Carlson to kill the dog because the dog annoys Slim. Slim doesn't allow Carlson to kill the dog because he wants Carlson to have his way. Slim allows Carlson to do what he does because the dog is old, it's drag-footed, the dog is maybe suffering, and therefore the kindest thing is to put the dog down. Slim knows that sacrifice is needed by Candy to stop the dog suffering, understands that emotions are there, but sometimes you have to just do the right thing, and that means going against your emotion. Now here we have, folks, exactly what will happen in chapter 6. Of course George loves Lenny. but he has to go against that emotion because he has to do what he believes is the right thing. Candy loves that dog, but Candy hasn't got the strength to make the sacrifice. That's why Candy says, maybe tomorrow, maybe tomorrow. He hasn't got the strength to make the sacrifice. George has the strength to make the sacrifice. Slim has the strength to make a sacrifice and know when a sacrifice is needed. And remember, Slim has already made sacrifices when he talks about the puppies, when he talks about how his dog had puppies and he drowned 4 of them right off because the mother couldn't feed that many. So it's not that Slim doesn't feel, it's not that he's not compassionate, he is, but he understands that in a harsh world that sacrifices have to be made, and Candy's dog has to be that sacrifice. I really love this this little piece of description that talks about Slim understanding that sacrifices have to be made. And it's when they're waiting in the silence for the shot to go out of Carlson's gun to say that Candy's dog has been shot, and Steinbeck uses this phrase, he says, subdued one hand and held it down. So what it shows you is that there's this, Slim is not cold or emotionless, he's far from it, he's compassionate, he's empathic, he understands love, he understands struggle, and he understands sacrifice, and it doesn't necessarily mean that he's completely happy within himself, but he knows that sacrifice has to be made. So here he subdues one hand and holds it down, as if one hand would at any moment raise itself up and say, stop, no, we can't do this. So he knows how much this is hurting Candy. He has to hold his hand down with his other hand. Now that shows strength, that shows moral certainty. So go Slim. Okay, now when Candy's dog is shot, remember Candy turns his face to the wall and he lies there in that fetal position, and so quiet is he that it's almost as if people forget that he's there. But what reawakens him, what makes him come alive again, is listening in to George and Lenny's talk about the dream. Now folks, I've done a huge big video on the dream, so I'm only touching upon the dream here because I've done that big video and it's important that you watch it. But anyway, Candy says, I ain't much good with only one hand. I lost my hand right here in this ranch. That's why they give me a job swamping, and they gave me $250 because I lost my hand, and I got 50 more saved up in the bank right now. That's 300, and I've got 50 coming to me at the end of the month. Tell you what, he leaned forward eagerly. Now, the key thing here is, we said that the stick-like wrist suggested violence, suggested the danger of the ranch, and now we find out that the ranch is a dangerous place. It was here that Candy lost his wrist. But Candy's money, his access to money, is what makes the idea of the dream seem possible. And again, we've got the repetition of 2 AO2 terms that are linked to Candy. Repetition of that verbal filler, tell you what, before he leans in eagerly. So look at the adverb there, eagerly. Now, if we think about where he was in this chapter, if we think about how he squirmed, how he looked for help from face to face, if we think about how he was shown as so vulnerable and so hurt when he turned round to the wall when he heard of the shot that killed his dog, and yet now he is eager, he speaks eagerly, he needs the dream. The dream gives him some sense of purpose. It's a promise of a life away from the violence, away from the emotional violence and the physical violence of the ranch, and therefore he would be eager to achieve that. He's willing to give everything he has. Remember, the only thing he has is money, but he's willing to give all of that to have a place somewhere away from the harsh reality of ranch house life, and therefore he speaks eagerly, and that's an important adverb. It says, Candy sat on the edge of his bunk. He scratched the stump of his wrist nervously. I got hurt 4 years ago, he said. They'll can me pretty soon. Just as soon as I can't swap out no bunkhouse, they'll put me out on the county. Now again, think about how we first saw him. We saw him with the broom. The broom was a psychological crutch. It showed that he had a purpose. He knows that he can't swap out no bunkhouses. So as soon as he can no longer fulfill that purpose, as soon as he can no longer push that broom, they'll get rid of him. He knows that. So that's why that broom is such a psychological crutch. Because as long as he can hold it, as long as he can push it, then at least he's got a bed. So he says, maybe if I give you guys my money, you'll let me hoe in the garden, even after I ain't no good at it. Now, oh, God bless him. Now, look here, you'll let me. I'll give you the money, but you'll let me. So he looks to them to allow him to have a purpose, even though he knows and they know he'll not be any good at it. So Candy is realistic. Candy knows that his time is coming, but I love the fact that he'll say, you'll let me. That he gives them power over him, despite the fact that it's his money that is allowing them to take this step towards making the dream a reality. Even though I know I ain't no good at it. Again, using those double negatives, part of his dialect. He said miserably. Again, look at that adverb. You seen what they done to my dog tonight? They says he was no good to himself nor nobody else. When they can me here, I wish somebody'd shoot me, but they won't do nothing like that. I'll have no place to go. I can't get no more jobs. I'll have $30 coming. Time you guys is ready to quit. Tell nobody. And George said to himself, okay, now let's look at this. The key thing is he understands the significance of what happened to his dog. When we said that the dog and he were symbolically aligned, they are, and he knows that the death of the dog is in some ways indicative of what's going to happen to him. See what they done to my dog tonight. And when they can me here, I wish somebody had shoot me. Now, why would somebody not shoot him? Because there's nobody to care. There's nobody to care about his suffering. His only emotional connection was to that dog, and now that's gone. And what he wants is, if he can buy an emotional connection, if he can buy some sense of purpose from George and Lenny, because he realizes that he can't get no more jobs, he doesn't have any other purpose. So even though he's sly, even though he warms the gossip, even though he's going to join the attack with joy in the next couple of pages, you have to realize that Candy is a pathetic man. Now, I don't mean pathetic like, oh, you're pathetic, an insult. A pathetic in that he cannot do very much, and therefore we feel sympathetic towards him. Okay. Now, so just when we feel that for him, just when we understand his isolation and his vulnerability, then we get a different side to him. And remember, it's important to understand the characters for their positive traits and their negative traits, because if your question is to show how far, then you want to be showing that this character can be seen in ways that are heroic or positive, and ways that are less heroic or more worthy of criticism. So Candy joins so when Carlson attacks Curly, verbally attacks Curly, when Carlson verbally attacks Curly, Candy joins the attack with joy. And that little phrase there is important, because it shows you how quickly Candy can be malicious, how he can be bitter. Already he's attacked Curly to George through the criticism of Curly and the criticism of Curly's wife, but there he was scared because he didn't want Curly to hear about that. Here he's not scared, because he's supported by Carlson, and therefore he feels he's supported by Carlson, and he feels that he has power through that relationship, through that support, and that's why he joins the attack with joy. He acts in that mob way, the bravado of a mob. That's how Candy shows a more malicious side. Okay, now the next time that we see Candy is in section 4 with Crooks. Okay, Now, when so remember, Crooks is in the harness room. That's the only place that's his own. Lenny comes in, and then Candy comes in. But if we think about what we see with Candy and Crooks, we see Candy showing power, and we also see him showing weakness. So let's look at him showing power first of all. So Candy withstands Crook's rejection of the dream. Like George, Candy elevates the ordinariness of his simple hopes, simple desire for something he could live on, and there could be nobody to throw him off. So that's what he wants. He wants a place where there could be nobody to throw him off. He wants a place where he can do the job even though he's no good at it, where you'll let me ho. So it's not as if this place is in any way going to give him a great degree of status. It's not. It's going to be a place of sanctuary. It's going to be a place where he'll have a purpose, even though that purpose is a mundane and ordinary one. There's nobody who could throw him off. And it seems like a magical place for him. And he's completely committed to it. And in relation to AO2, he uses anaphora. He says, we're gonna. And what we have here is the idea that it's going to happen. He's determined. He's emphatic about that. He truly believes in it now. He believes that there's an opportunity for him to escape and a place where he'll be protected. And so he uses that repetition of we're gonna to show that he believes in it, that he is as convinced as George was in section 3 when George sat entranced with his own picture. And if you think about that metaphor of George sitting entranced with his own picture, well, that has worked for Candy because he believes in it. He believes that it's going to happen. We're gonna. There's no doubt now. Okay, so when Candy is talking about the dream to Crooks, he's overpowered with the picture. So consumed is the vividness of his dream that both men become momentarily lost in it. And Candy really believes that this is a new way of living and it can block out all the misery of that old. He can have a purpose. He's not going to get canned. It's somewhere where he will be let to hoe. It'll be his own place. Now, the key thing is that Candy, the misery of the dog shooting, happened just before the entrance of the dream. And it's the entrance of the dream that gives Candy strength. And Steinbeck makes this apparent, and it becomes apparent in chapter 4 when Candy is feeling pressurized by Curly's wife. Curly's wife comes in and calls them a sheep and a dum-dum, and remember calls them bindle stiffs. And what we have here is that Candy feels empowered by the dream, because this simple sentence is such an important one for Candy, because Steinbeck says, but a change came over old Candy, but a change. Now it's the idea of the dream and the strength and the companionship and the idea that he will be part of a collective. He will not be isolated any longer, but he will be part of a family. He will have George, he will have Lenny, he'll have his own place where no one can throw him off, and that gives him a sense of vitality and power, and it gives him an integrity that he's never had up until this point, and he uses that to stand up to Curly's wife. So that quotation, but a change came over old Candy, is a really important simple sentence. Just think about your AO2, a simple sentence. That's enough to tell the examiner. But what's the importance of this simple sentence? It shows, it makes explicit that Candy is empowered by the dream. So the idea that being part of a collective, being part of a family, having a place to go that is your own, a roof over your own head, what it does is it reawakens hope for Candy, takes away perhaps a little bit of the misery that came to him through the shooting of his dog, and it shows that he's loyal to that hope. But a change came over old Candy. His forcefulness is made apparent because he stands up to Curly's wife. In section 3 you had his weakness. He joined the attack with joy, and he did that because he aligned himself with Slim and Carlson. But here he's not showing weakness. Here he's showing strength. And he's aligning himself with the dream and the hope and the companionship that George and Lenny and the dream offer to him, and that makes him stand up and attack the bitterness of another isolated person. It's ironic in that Candy is isolated, Curly's wife is isolated, and yet they don't have that sense of connection because of that. Instead, Candy stands up to her, and he puts her in her place. So I think I just said this, but I'll just say it again. So in section 3, you've had that weakness through he joined the attack with joy because of Slim and Carlson were there. They instigated the challenge and he just came along. But this time it's different. Candy alone faces the bitterness of Curly's wife. Vitriol is another word for bitterness. That's if someone is saying something that's bitter or twisted or warped, the vitriol that comes out of her. But her bitterness is a result of her isolation, just as his bitterness when he joined the attack with the joy was because that he's isolated, and this was as an opportunity for him to feel aligned to someone else. Strength in numbers, Okay, so Candy's devotion to the dream empowers him, and he says, us guys. So that, look at that, just look at the pronoun there, us guys, we together. He feels some sense of unity, and it's in that unity that he feels strength. And this is an important thing too. He speaks angrily to Curly's wife. Again, that idea that adverbs are used to tell us so much about the character. But he says he uses Curly's wife's words against her because she called them a bunch of bindle stiffs. She called them a nigger, a dum-dum, and a lousy old sheep. So you got Crooks, Lenny, and she called Candy a lousy old sheep. So she used those words to attack them. But what Candy does is something quite clever. He takes those words and he uses them back at her. So what he does is he assimilates her words, he takes on board her words, but to give himself power, to throw them back at her now. And by doing that, what he's doing is he's defending himself and defending his friends, his newfound friends, in relation to her and her attack. So the dream of our own ranch, and again pronouns are so important there, our own ranch, togetherness, it promises a future of a life that's worth leading. And why is it worth leading? Because there will be companionship. No one is isolated, they will be together. And the use of pronouns here for Candy is so important because Candy hasn't really been linked to pronouns before. But well, you've had his dog, but it's just been him. He's not had this companionship or connection to any other human being, but now he has it to George and Lenny, and Crooks wants in on that too. And when we look at Crooks, we'll see how his pronouns change. We got our own ranch to go to and our own house, and we ain't got to stay here. So we being part of that collective is something that's so empowering for Candy. And when you think about it, in chapter 4, being part of a collective showed him being malicious when he joined the attack with joy, when he could be aggressive because Slim and Carlson were being so, then he was. When he could attack one person because he had the strength of other people's anger, then he would. But here, being part of the collective is solely seen in a positive way for him, because it means that he is part of a family who will look out for each other, who will have a home. They've got an option. They don't have to stay there and be isolated. They can go somewhere else and be together. Now, he taunts Curly's wife. Remember, Curly's wife is isolated, she is lonely, she is vulnerable, and we're going to find all of that out in chapter 5. And think of the irony of that. She's the only person who has a legitimate personal connection to somebody else. She's married, she's somebody's wife, she has a husband. But despite the fact that they have that connection sanctified by in a religious way or in a civic way, whatever way their marriage was held, the key thing is it means nothing because she doesn't like her husband. She's isolated and she's lonely. She speaks to the men in the ranch about her loneliness, but they don't hear her. They don't accept it. And instead what he does is he taunts her, he stands up against her, and he assimilates her language, as I said before. So through the though hidden amongst the aggression of her attack on the men's dignity and masculinity, Curly's wife speaks of her loneliness. And what am I doing? Standing here talking to a bunch of bindle stiffs, a nigger and a dum-dum and a lousy old sheepdog, and liking it because there ain't nobody else. So that's her. She wants a connection wherever it may be, no matter how weak that connection may be. If it is talking to men that she disrespects, it doesn't matter. She needs a connection. But Candy uses that against her, as I said earlier on, and instead what he does is he talks about how he's in a different situation from her. He says, and we got friends, that's what we got, and the multiple use of connections, and he said, and we've got friends, and when he's talking about the dream as well and the different aspects of it, he uses and to emphasize how passionate he is, and how different his life is from hers. He's not isolated, he's got friends, he's got power, he's got hope. He doesn't have to stay there. Per Curly's wife, she does. He takes it further. He belittles her. He tells her to go roll your hoop. Now, rolling a hoop is a childhood pastime. It's a game for children, and what it does is suggest, first of all, it belittles her. How, who is she? She's just a kid. But also it shows an aspect to her which should be worthy of sympathy. She is just a kid. She is just young and naive and stupid and trapped in a terrible situation. He reduces her status to that of a child because he disrespects her, but what it reminds us of as an audience is that she is just a kid. She is young. And what he tries to do there is just belittle her further to have status for himself. But remember, the status that he's trying to claim here for himself, it's not egotistical. He's trying to stand up for his friends. He's trying to stand up for this new companionship that he has, that he's not had before apart from his dog. Because he says, we've got friends, our own ranch. So he's trying to protect what's important to him, and what's important to him is the connection to others and the ranch. He reclaims her abusive terms, that Bindlestiff term. He assimilates her language but uses it against her. He assimilates her language to challenge it and to reassert the independent hope that he has. He is no longer subordinate to her. He feels that he has something that she desperately wants, and he has it. He's got friends, he's got a place to go, he doesn't have to stay here. However, it doesn't last long. The hope subsides because he's weakened by Curly's wife when she reclaims the power. Now remember, she reclaims the power over Crooks. She goes for the weakest link, and the weakest link is Crooks and his race. And she uses that to assume power again over the Bindlestiffs. And what we find is that Candy, that change come over old Candy as mentioned before. But here that change doesn't last. It says Candy subsided. That little 2-word sentence there, Candy subsided. He cannot deny the reality of her words. And again, he assimilates her language when she says nobody would listen to you, and he says he accepts that nobody had listened to us. He doesn't have power when she can break down so easily. So the crucial thing is that the dream and the idea of friendship, that empowers Candy for a moment. It allows him momentarily to belittle Curly's wife, but authority is re-established when she threatens Crooks, and by establishing that authority, then Candy's opportunity to stand up for what he believes in and for this new companionship, that opportunity starts to wane, and the simple sentence is there, Candy subsided. Okay, now the next time that we see Candy is in section 5, when Candy discovers the dead body of Curly's wife. So it's Candy who discovers the dead body of Curly's wife. And when he discovers the dead body of Curly's wife, it says, Now Candy spoke his greatest fear. You and me can get that little place, can't we, George? You and me can go and live nice, can't we, George? Can't we? The crucial thing here is look at those rhetorical questions. You can't we, George? Can't we? Again, repetition of key terms for Candy. Can't we? Can't we? He there appears desperate and he appears weak, and it's almost as if he's taking the place of Lenny in that idea that he's dependent on George now. And what we have is the understanding of the weakness of Candy, the idea that he knows the dream can't happen, and he's got no future any longer. He doesn't have that idea of our own ranch and a place where he can go. Before George answered, Candy dropped his head and looked down at the hay. Oh, God bless. So if you look at that description there, he dropped his head and looked down at the hay. Oh, sorry, I dropped the thingy-mabobber there. You've got this idea that he understands that the joy, the delight, the hope, the future that he thought had planned has all now come to nothing because of Lenny's act here in the barn. So a key thing here, look at the superlative there, his greatest fear. His greatest fear now is that he won't be able to have the connection. He won't be able to have the sanctuary of that little ranch. He won't be able to have that emotional link to George and Lenny, and that's his greatest fear. And that superlative there is a nice wee AO2 that we could take with us. When he's left alone with Curly's wife's body, look at his language. You goddamn tramp, he said viciously. You done it, didn't you? I suppose you're glad. Everybody knowed you'd messed things up. You was no good. You ain't no good now, you lousy tart. Now, I think it's telling that one time when Candy is so bitter towards Curly, where his language becomes so abusive, is when she's dead. You goddamn tramp. He speaks viciously, adverb. You ain't no good. You'd mess things up. You lousy tart. So remember, when we first see him in chapter 2, he tells us Curly's married, use of ellipsis, a tart. And here when we last see him in chapter 5, he uses the same word, but now he uses the adjective lousy tart. So his language is even more embittered, because what she has done, or what he believes that she has done, is robbed him of that chance to have a future, robbed him of that chance to have an emotional connection with someone else. And then to I suppose to balance the negativity we may feel towards him with the language there that he used, we understand, well, why did he use that language? Why was he so aggressive? Why was he so critical of that poor girl who was lying dead at his feet? Well, because this is what her actions have denied him. He said, he paused and then went on in a sing song. Now, just think of that. It makes him sound almost childlike. It reinforces his vulnerability that he speaks of what he's lost in this sing song. So his voice goes up and down. It's almost childlike, shows vulnerability. And he repeated the old words. If there was a circus or a baseball game, we would just went to her. Just said to hell with work and went to her. Never asked nobody say so rather. And there'd have been a pig and chickens in the winter and a fat stove in the rain, and us just sitting there, his eyes blinded with tears, and he turned and went weakly out of the barn. Oh, God bless him. So, and also think of the past tense. Here the dream is spoken of in the past tense, not the future tense, not the way that it was all the way through, that we're gonna. So here it's not we're gonna, it was he says, we would have went to her. So he speaks of the dream in the past tense. He knows that it's gone, and his eyes are blinded with tears. Now remember, when they shot his dog, he turned away. but here we see his emotion. His eyes are blinded with tears. So we've got this idea, the last images we have of him, of his vulnerability with that childish sing-song cadence, his eyes blinded with tears, and he speaks of the dream in the past tense. Okay, so this is an important phrase that Candy says in relation to Lenny here in section 5. He says, "Poor bastard," he said softly. So despite the fact that he's looking at Curly's wife who's dead, his sympathy is directed towards Lenny. Because he understands. Now, the key thing is, poor bastard, that term has been used before by George to describe Lenny. And here exactly the same words are used by Candy to describe Lenny. And what it does is it shows that Candy, like George, understands Lenny, understands Lenny's inability to work in this world, inability to understand this world and to operate in this world, because his huge strength and his very low IQ, those two things together will mean that he's always going to be a danger to himself and danger to others. Look at your adverb there. He said softly. Think about how violently he spoke of Curly's wife to her dead body. Think of his aggression. You goddamn tart, or you always mess things up, you lousy tart. All of that aggression in language towards here, but here what we have in terms of Lenny is we have sympathy, and he, like George, understands Lenny's situation and understands that he's in a position where, unfortunately, he's always going to be a danger, he's always going to be a threat. Okay, the last part of section 5 has this really sad image of old Candy. Old Candy lay down in the hay and covered his eyes with his arm. Oh, God bless. Remember those eyes that are blinded with tears. And what we have here is a final image of a broken man. He appears weak and pathetic, and ultimately he appears hopeless. And the key thing here is that he was a remnant of a man when we saw him in section 2 or chapter 2, but here he truly is at his lowest ebb. Here he is at his weakness. And the fact that he lies down in the hay and covered his eyes with his arm is so important, because what it does is it reminds us of what his dog did earlier in the novel when death was at hand. If we look at how his dog was depicted, I'm just going to go to the next slide so you can see that. So it said, after a moment, the ancient dog walked lamely in through the open door. He gazed about with mild, half-blind eyes. He sniffed and then lay down and put his head between his paws. So look at how the dog was at the end of chapter 2. And this is how closely aligned Candy is to his dog, because you have this idea that the ancient dog walked lamely in through the open door. He gazed about with mild, half-blind eyes. Now in section 5 there we have had the phrase that Candy's eyes were blinded with tears, and that both Candy and his dog have, they both lie down. Candy lies down in the hay, the dog lies down here. Candy covers his eyes with his arm, and the dog put his head between his paws. So you've got this repeated structure of how the dog is seen at the end of section 2, just before it dies, Candy's description at the end of section 5, and what it can do is it suggests that the only thing left for Candy is a sad death. Now, we don't hear of it, we don't see it, that's not anything that's ever explicitly stated in the novella, but the fact that Candy's last appearance parallels him with his dog so closely makes us feel that there is nothing left for him, that he is hopeless. Oh, poor Candy.